Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're joining us from today. A very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elvis Mogesa Ongiri, and I welcome you to the Kabarak University Press webinar on honoring the legacy of Dr. Bonaya Godana. We are honored to have a stellar panel today to lead our discussions, and I'll introduce them shortly. So first of all, I'll start with our aim as Kabarak University Press. We are privileged to host this International Law Month at Kabarak 2025. And as a Global South academic publisher, we must be a proactive enabler for the scholar conversations and reflections. And that is why we are having this webinar today. Furthermore, the International Law Month at Kabarak is a month-long series aimed at highlighting the international law questions relevant to the Global South today. We've already had our first webinar on international space law and space debris, which is available in our YouTube page. At the end of this series, we aim to launch a blog on international law named in honor of Bonaya Godana. Lastly, and importantly also, Kabarak University Press is happy to remind you that Kenya has a candidate for the elections to the ICJ in November 2026, a close friend and supporter of Kabarak University Press, Professor Phoebe Okowa, and who is a panelist today. We are honored to support and contribute to Professor Okowa's candidacy, and you can look at our social media handles for this. So to start us off with the opening remarks, I welcome Mr. Humphrey Tipala, the Editor-in-Chief of Kabarak University Press. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elvis Mogesa. Thank you as well to our very eminent panel and to our audience today. It is an honor for Kabarak University Press to be hosting you today to celebrate the contributions of a friend, colleague, family member, father, to a servant, a confidant to the founder of our university, Dr. Bonaya Godana. I think today will be, unlike other conversations where we have a lot of erudition today, while we will engage with what the vision of international law was for Bonaya Godana, it will also be a day to celebrate him and a day for personal anecdotes, I think, a day to celebrate what we could learn from his example. I am drawn today to the words of Muhammad Abdallah Hassan, the warrior poet revolutionary from Somalia. He is famous as having said, Allah, do not give me vision if you do not give it to others. I've always found it a fascinating prayer, a fascinating cry of an intellectual to think like this, to ask themselves why they can see things that others can't. Drawn to the same conversation, it reminds me of the thoughts of Isa Shivji when he was responding to an inaugural lecture of William Tunga that he gave at Kabarak University, when he spoke of sources of knowledge as sites of struggle, as where we find where we should see as vision. I think in many ways, this kind of links to the latest separate opinion of Judge Yusuf, where Judge, I think you express a certain urgency, a certain frustration, as it were, with us clinging on to Eurocentric terminologies in our discipline. And I think one of the ways of redressing this tenacity of colonial terminologies is to reimagine our sources of knowledge. And one of the ways of reimagining our sources of knowledge is to celebrate the Africans, global South thinkers who have participated in the building of our disciplines, which kind of circles back to Bonaya Godana. And such an understanding of this vision that Allah gives to one and does not give to others, or should give to others. It's not just a base nativism, to my mind. I think it is, in the case of Bonaya Godana, we do not only celebrate his thought, but we emulate and celebrate his example as an honorable man. His thought on cooperation, not competition in international freshwater law was as prescient in 1985 as it is today, as useful today. His work in peacemaking, his example as foreign minister and diplomat for Kenya, his commitment to uplifting his own community. He who was first among many in his community was not content to eat alone. Professor Okowa has shared, what she saw him do when she was a student. So it's something that he did all his life. A job that Mama Sara continues. She has dragged me into mentoring and always trying to make sure that somebody else learns and shares in that opportunity to know. His commitment to duty, I think. It might not be so obvious to our students today, but in 2002, 2003, the monolith that was the ruling party, KANU, was collapsing to many eyes. But he remained committed to his work with KANU and with the work of our founder, the founder of our university. And I'm fascinated with the kind of man who does that, who doesn't go with vogue and chooses to maintain his principle. He was a man of faith. So in the spirit of personal anecdotes, just a quick one. I never knew Bonaya Godana, but as a happenstance, I found myself in a diplomatic reception at the embassy of the Vatican, the Apostolic Nunciature, when he was foreign minister. And he was quite, everybody was around him at the time, I recall. And what was striking, and I remember overhearing this on good authority. I think it's no secret that at the time the government of Moi was quite unpopular. But a lot of the diplomatic discourse was happening because of the man himself. The diplomatic corps was happy to engage with a brilliant, honest, thoughtful foreign minister. And that speaks to the man that we are here to remember and celebrate. This is not to mean that we should be hagiographic about his scholarship, but really to celebrate the parts, the inspiration that his life and his contributions to our discipline give us. And this kind of circles back around to that initial thought, I think, that cry of Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, of sharing sites of knowledge, of sharing sources of knowledge, and the kind of examples in scholarship that edify our heritage, that imagine the best of our communities, of our societies. And that, I think, is who Bonaya Godana is. But we're also really thankful and grateful to have here with us three who knew him well and worked with him. And so I look forward to hearing your sharing about Bonaya Godana. I should just quickly thank Sandra Butcher for her facilitation of this webinar, and also to make a quick word of support that was shared to me by Judge Fatsa Ugagus, who could not be with us, but remembers Bonaya Godana fondly and wishes us the best in this conversation. Again, to our eminent panel, thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mwalimu Sipala. It's a wonderful, it's a wonderful opening remarks asking us to reimagine our sources of knowledge. And I think Professor Michel Remugo has often spoke about this, talking about origins and And in many ways, what we are going to listen to next from the family, I believe, is that like oral statements as ways of sources of knowledge. So now I want to welcome the family of Dr. Bonaya Godana, Honorable Sara, and Miss Angela Gumato Bonaya. Please join in. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Nyamo, for the invite. I would want to thank the Kabarak University fraternity for this very noble initiative in honoring the late Dr. Bonaya Godana, who was my late husband. My children have also joined in, they are listening, and they're really appreciative. I would also want to appreciate the panelists for joining this conversation and sharing their thoughts, because it's very, very important for us as a family to know this other side, because we knew him as a family man, as a husband, as a father, but most of his other friends, professional friends, I think this is a very good opportunity for us to link in and to share with them our own experiences as a family, and for them also to share, so that we together we share with the rest of the world the value of this great man who happened to be with us for a given time, but he left behind a solid legacy as a scholar, as a parliamentarian, as a family man, and as a peacemaker, and a mission on which he ultimately lost his life. Otherwise, do I continue with the story?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I need to introduce myself. My name is Dr Bonaya. I was a member of East African Legislative Assembly for 2 terms, that is 10 years, from 2007 to 2017. My background is health, and that is what propelled me to take interest in regional health matters, as well as regional peace and conflict resolution. And I served for a term of 2 terms, and I really appreciate that period, because we influenced quite a bit of regional issues, even in terms of, I also sat on legal committee. I think that is where I got my interest. I also sat on trade committee, because I felt most of African issues were emanating, most of our challenges were emanating from poor economic decisions that we make as countries. We tend to have healthy challenges because we lack funds, we go begging globally. But if only we managed our trades and our economy well, we would have actually managed to overcome most of our challenges in terms of education, in terms of health, and all the other many issues. Currently, I'm working as a commissioner with the National Human Rights Commission. Training, discipline, services in healthcare in general. I think that is the highest rated regulator in this country. And I'm lucky, and I appreciate the fact that I was appointed to that. Yes, in defending health rights. But as a family, we have also taken a big challenge in terms of caring for young people, in terms of education, job placement, economic empowerment, especially girl child. And going back to Bonaya's story, that is I am in a committee, 3-month committee that is dealing with other urgent national matters, but we are still working on the report, so still on health. And going back to Bonaya's story, starting with his early life, we both actually grew up in a purely pastoralic nomadic communities. I happened to be a pioneer girl to have gone to school from purely nomadic community. Bonaya also was from a purely nomadic community. He's a fourth born in a family of 8, 7 brothers and 1 sister. But he happens to be the only one who went to school. And his family was just purely pastoralists, and they still continue being pastoralists. They are proud and they are doing their very best in that area. And Bonaya, as a family person, we met with Bonaya because I was a pioneer girl. And when I went to my high school, I did very well in school, in high school. But my passion in nursing or healthcare drove me to downgrade my position to doing nursing. I asked, of course, we didn't have good mentors then. As a pioneer, I didn't even know where to turn to. But the rights of the young girls who dropped out of school towards to be engaged in early marriage because of cultural practices. And I happened to be the sole survivor, the only girl in a class of 54, pushed me to look at the challenges those girls went through. And I wanted to be specifically to be a midwife, which I actually became after doing nursing degree at diploma level. But including the late Dr. Bonaya, everybody thought I was downgrading myself. But who knows? The paths of life might lead you to where your passion, your passion might lead you to where you deserve. And I think right now I've been taken to all the right places, right from the basics to policy level, to legislative level, and to regional level, and to international level through Human Rights Commission. Now I think God has blessed me to achieve my dream and my passion. So Bonaya went to Marsabit primary school. They were actually picked by the local chiefs by force. The parents didn't want them to go to school, but he managed to, and he was also very reluctant because his mother never placed his going to school. So he even ran away. He almost died on the way of thirst, of snake bite. He went through so many challenges, but the chief still brought him back. And he finally settled in the school, but in a very strange environment where he had no communication with his family or no contact, because most of the time they were just staying in school because they didn't know where to go. The logistics those days, there was no road network, there was no transport. So they ended up being mostly under the care of the school management. And one key support system was the Catholic Church, which also came in handy and gave him all the support. Like most of us, our education was blessed by the Catholic Church. And I think most of his work was also guided by the philanthropic aspect that the Catholic Church provided to the children they were supporting. And I personally met Bonaya when I finished high school, and he was called and told, there's this young girl who is downgrading herself. She doesn't want to go for a higher course. She can be a lawyer. She can be anything she wants. And he spoke to me, and I told him, just allow me to follow my passion because I want to go back and attend to reproductive health needs of those girls. I need to give service in that area in my home community. Sadly, when I finished the college and at Kenyatta National Hospital, Kenya Medical Training College, I went back to my village. They told me, sorry, you can't work here, you are too qualified. So I missed that opportunity. But I also realized the problem I felt at home was even bigger in Nairobi and the rest of the world. And that is why now I have pursued in different, at different levels. Of course, also giving attention to my community alongside. So we met, and I think he felt this is somebody very strange. Why is she not even listening to my advice? She's losing opportunity. She's this. But later he found out that I was actually in the right path. He felt I was passionate, and he supported me through and through. And until I even did my master's level in UK, and I did a course in health management, policy and planning at master's level in UK. And that is when I could also be able to influence strategy, policy, and legislation at different levels. I think he's been a big support partner, a big support system to me. He went into parliament. We met when he was a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, and he was a lecturer and chair of international public law at the University of Nairobi. And immediately we got married. He also showed sign of wanting to join politics. But to me, it was too early because we were starting a new family, and we felt we needed first to establish the family. But he felt he had no time to wait because the community was completely, of course, where we come from is a place called North Horr, which is east of Lake Turkana. It's a pure desert, and the communities were having so many challenges in terms of access to water, health facility, education, economics, everything. There was a big challenge, and he felt he couldn't just relax when he could see the many challenges and that communities are going through, and the many opportunities they were missing as the rest of the world was moving on. So in 1998, we got married in 1986, and he joined parliament in 1988 when my firstborn, Sophia, was only 4 months old. So you can imagine the challenge the family went through, because being in politics, he was also very young at the age of 34, 35, and I was only 24. So we were now juggling the family and the community. Also noting that Okowa is more than 700 kilometers or more from Nairobi. So every weekend he tries his best to reach out, to be with the community. And he tried his level best to, especially issues of education, issues of healthcare, issues of employment, and generally educating the communities. And it's like there was no mobile phone, no telephone, actually, the network. But interestingly, he was in touch with everybody, maybe using he could use anything he could access, including the Red Cross or AMREF radio call, which was placed strategically in different places. And they gave him a nickname, Morning and Evening. In my traditional language, they call him Boru Galgalo, meaning morning and evening. He knew what was happening in the different corners of the vast constituency, which is actually very vast, extending from Lake Turkana to Wajir, to Isiolo, to Samburu, partly, and to Laisamis, then with the Moyale and Matsako constituency just in between. So it's a very vast constituency that he was working in, and he really tried. And he used to be a very, very early riser. He wakes up like at 4, writes his day's work. He plans very early for his day. And by 7, he's already in the office, which means he has very high discipline and work ethic. And he was highly principled in his whatever he was doing. And he really ensured that everything he does and everything around him was done in a legal way, legitimate, which was very unusual for the political space that he found himself in. But he tried. And so as a parliamentarian, he also served as a deputy speaker, and he worked on the standing orders for parliament. He also worked on the CDF bill, which came into an act that is currently enabling CCF. But for him, CDF Act was not meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a stopgap measure before the constitution came into force, because he felt, like where he was representing, the place was totally under the Catholic Church, the hospitals, the schools. So he needed something short term, of course, to be able to reach the communities, some funding to reach the communities. But in his mind, immediately the constitution kicks in, then CDF stops, stopped, and the MPs now oversight, and the Senate oversight, and the MCAs oversight the workings of the county government to ensure full responsibility and implementation of the ensuring community needs are met at different levels. So that was basically his, of course, it is not the one who presented the CDF bill, it was Engineer Karue, because he was the deputy speaker then, and he could not, he couldn't participate, but he facilitated that process. Among others, he worked on the standing orders. I think since the colonial times, that was maybe the first serious review which they did. And then he was also assigned to work as in his second term. He served for 4 terms. In his second term, he also served as he also served as an assistant minister for health, where he also pushed to facilitate establishment of basic health infrastructure in hard-to-reach areas in the country, and facilitated proper planning at the ministerial level, because mostly the planning at the ministry level was done at the headquarters, and it was not adequately covering the rest of the country. So as a minister, he also served as a minister, and one of the areas where he touched on international law is when he was a minister for foreign affairs, and he had a lot of, good opportunity to serve as a diplomat. And that was in between 1998 to 2001, where he served as a minister for foreign affairs. And he was engaged in diplomatic issues like peace process in Somalia, peace process in South Sudan, among others. He also did, some, even the map of Kenya, actually. He actually tried to do the mapping, the beacons, establishing the beacons, and also draft on foreign policy, national foreign policy. He worked on it. And wherever he went, wherever he studied, starting from Marsabit Boys, Marsabit Full Primary School, Marsabit Meru School, where he did his Form 5 and 6, University of Nairobi, where he was the first ever to get first class honors in law. And wherever he went, he was a top student. And it's just by God's grace, actually, that he excelled in everything he did, I think, because he was focused. He was focused on what he was doing. He was genuine. He was also passionate in what he was doing. And he aimed at giving the best to the world, which I think he did, because by the time he left, when he departed in 2006, maybe he has worked 100 years ahead of his time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonaya. What you've given us is like a strand that I've gotten is, despite the challenges he went through from starting out as a nomadic community to rise to the height of our foreign minister, it's truly inspirational. So we'll move on to Professor Laurence Boisson de Chazournes, who is a professor of international law at University of Geneva. She's also a member of the Institute of International Law and a member of the Curatorium of the Hague Academy of International Law, where she happens to be giving a lecture today, actually. She also has served as counsel and arbitrator in numerous cases before various international tribunals. Please welcome, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And I was very touched by what we just heard about Dr. Godana, but please allow me to call him Godana because that was the way I was I was calling him. I was a student with him at the Graduate Institute of International Studies, and I must say that I've always been impressed by all the qualities of Godana. So when he arrived in Geneva, he was older than I, and he was already a very seasoned lawyer. He had a lot of legal maturity, and I remember him sitting at the library and working a lot, days and nights almost, to write his PhD. I think in a way, I think it's the only recipe if you want to do a good PhD, it's to work a lot as he did. And I should stress that he established a record because he wrote his PhD in 3 years. So this is something that not many lawyers do. And he published his dissertation in 1985. So what I'd like to do in honoring the Godana is to speak about his book, his dissertation, his book. I think it's a true pioneering study of the law applicable to international watercourses. And that what I think is interesting, because I had the pleasure to read it again for preparing this seminar, is that you see the feelings and the heart of Godana in his book. I think he was aware that the problem of drought was an immense problem in Africa, and he wanted to find a solution to confront this situation and to ensure access to water. So he wrote about the sound management of international watercourses. And in doing that, he stressed the importance of cooperation among states for regulating and managing international watercourses. First, I'd like to sort of situate the study of Godana, because this was at a time when you didn't have many studies on the topic. You had a few books, not more, not much. You didn't have any African scholar who had really written about this topic, so it was at the forefront. And this was a topic that was discussed at the International Law Commission. It was a topic that had been inscribed on the agenda of the International Commission, but not much had been done on the topic. So really, I think it's a pioneering study, and it's a book that sheds light on different issues. So he was a true believer in cooperation. He also thought that for managing well international watercourses, you needed to have joint development projects. And we know that for this, it's rare. You need trust and confidence among the riparian states, and it's very difficult to establish. But he had these wishes, and this is something that I'd like to highlight about the dissertation, is that he's forward-looking and he's also expressing his own ideas. Now, what he noted, and I think it's important for Africa, he noted that Africa has no fewer than 71 basins, drainage basins. So this is a number which is very high, and it's the most important number in terms of comparisons if we compare Africa to other regions of the world. He also noted, and I think it's interesting, that there are interesting cooperative mechanisms that have taken place, been forged in the context of the African continent. Now, what he did was to take three basins. So it was the Nile, the Niger, and the Senegal rivers, and he tried to identify the most important principles of international law that should find application. In doing so, with this study, I think this study has remained a standard reference for people working in the law of international watercourses. in all the bibliography that you're going to check, you will see his book. And I must say that I have used it when I was working at the World Bank on the international watercourses. This was an important reference book that I used. I used it in other endeavors after having left the World Bank. So something I think that I should also stress about the book is that Godana was also highlights the imprint of colonial practices on the legal regime of watercourses. And in highlighting this imprint of colonial practices, such as, for example, navigation regimes, he also showed that a lot of African countries showed the willingness to put aside these practices and negotiate new treaties. So I think it's also something that it's a book which is also important in terms of the historical context that he described. Now, another point that I would like to highlight from the perspective of international water law is that he called in 1983-85 for sound application of the principle of reasonable and equitable use of the watercourses, while enshrining this principle in the obligation to take into account the environment. So already in the early 80s, Godana was saying you can't have a fair and reasonable use of a watercourse if you don't take into account the environmental conditions of the basin. And I would like to say that this was quite visionary, because at that time when he was writing his book, international water law and international environmental law were apart. It's really in the early 90s that the practitioners, the academics, tried to link environmental law to international water law. So as you can see in this brief statement, what I've tried to do is to show the pioneering endeavor that Godana conducted with his PhD and the publication of his PhD. I've highlighted few important issues, and I think that he had opened the path for a reflection about the effective management of Africa's shared water resources, not only surface waters, but I think we should also be thinking about underground waters, which are shared by African countries. And I very much hope that the young generation in Kenya will follow his path and continue to explore this body of law, which is, I think, crucial for African countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Boisson de Chazournes. You have spoken to us about like how the heart and the feelings of Dr. Godana can be seen through his work, and finishing it in 3 years, the dissertation is really inspirational. So thank you so much. And we once again thank you for giving us your time, and I know you'll have to leave after. Thank you. So we'll move on to Judge Abdulqawi Yusuf. Judge Yusuf presently serves at the International Court of Justice since 2009, where he was previously president from 2018 to 2021 and vice president from 2015 to 2018. Prior to that, he was legal advisor with UNESCO and UNIDO, and he also was the founder and general editor of the seminal publication African Yearbook of International Law and the African Foundation for International Law. And Professor and Judge Abdulqawi Yusuf will be joining to speak about Bonaya Godana, both at Graduate and the African Association for International Law. Thank you so much. Welcome, Judge.
Thank you, and I am very pleased to be here with you today. But at the same time, of course, it's a pleasure that is tempered by a sense of sadness, because I don't think that even after 20 years, we have overcome the sadness that we felt with the loss of Bonaya Godana, with the untimely loss of Bonaya Godana, which of course was a loss not only to his family, not only to his community, not only to Kenya, I think, to the entire world. And I'm very happy to see Madam Sara Bonaya today after such a long time, because I have not seen her for a very, very long time. And I remember when we first met in Nairobi with Bonaya at the Intercontinental Hotel. And it was such a pleasure to meet the wife of an old friend, because when I first met him in Geneva, he was not married. And we met in Geneva. When he came to Geneva, I had already been there for a year. And there were two Kenyans who came to the Graduate Institute. They were the first Kenyans there, and I was the first Somali there. And of course, one of them was doing a doctorate in international economics. Bonaya was doing a doctorate in international law. So of course, I felt closer to Bonaya because we were in the same discipline. And we were both faced by many challenges. One of the first challenges we were faced with was the fact that we had to learn French quickly. And I remember that one of the things that Bonaya consulted me soon after he came was, how did you do it? And I advised him to take intensive courses immediately, because we knew that the seminaries were taught in English and French, but we did not expect that many of the participants in the seminaries would write their papers in French and would also criticize and comment on our papers in French. So we had really to be ready for all of that. And I was really impressed later by the speed with which Bonaya mastered the language and learned the French language quickly, and was able really to participate very actively in all the seminars. But apart from the challenges, we also had a lot of fun, because we both decided to learn downhill skiing. And I mean, African is engaging in downhill skiing in the Alps. It was not easy for either of us, but we used it to go together and with a group of other doctoral students. And there also, Bonaya was really one of the best, I tell you, because in my case, after a while, I gave up and I just turned it to cross-country skiing, which I found safer and less adventurous. But Bonaya kept, engaging in this adventurous downhill skiing, and he excelled at it, and he was extremely good. And a few years later, of course, we met after he had left already Geneva, and I remained in Geneva because I started working for the United Nations. But we started planning, even before he left Geneva in 1984, together with a Namibian friend and colleague, Uaraka, who was at the time working in the Human Rights Division of the United Nations. We started planning the creation of an African Association of International Law. And Huaraka was older than the two of us. He was more experienced, and he had a much better network. So we gave him, in a way, the leadership of the initiative, and he brought together a conference of African international lawyers, the inaugural conference of African international lawyers in Lusaka, Zambia in 1986. And immediately as we came together, there were two issues which were difficult to deal with. One was that there was a French-speaking group of African international lawyers who wanted to take over immediately the conference and the leadership of the conference. And of course, we could not allow that because we had spent a long time on the preparation for this conference, and we wanted everybody to participate and the leadership to be democratically elected. And so there was a kind of a dispute among the participants. And I can tell you that Bonaya Godana played really an extremely important role in mediating that dispute and finding a resolution for it. And the second issue was that we went to Lusaka without any documents for the association that was to be created. So we had to immediately set up a drafting committee for the statutes of the association. And since among the international lawyers who worked in English, Bonaya and I were the only ones who were bilingual. We were put together with two French-speaking colleagues, and we were asked to draft the statutes. And you can imagine, for a conference that lasts only 4 or 5 days, we were given only 12 hours to draft the statutes of the association. So we had to stay up the whole night, and we were working in both languages. So we had to draft in English first, or in an article in English first, and then the same article in French, etc., and translated. Or the other way around, an article would be drafted in French, and then because everybody expected us to present the next day draft statutes of the association that were in both languages. And then fast forward to the late 1980s and 1990s, I should say, because it was in the late 1990s that actually Bonaya was appointed foreign minister of Kenya. And it was something which gave us a lot of joy and a lot of happiness. And I always informed him when I was traveling to Nairobi that I would be arriving in Nairobi, and he would always insist that he would send me a driver at the airport to pick me up. And one day I arrived at the airport, and the driver was there, and the driver said, "Your brother wants you to come directly to the office." But it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had been traveling for 7, 8 hours. And I told him, "But I can't." No, he insisted, "You have to go to the office before going to the hotel." And then I discovered only afterwards, when I met Bonaya, that he was going to travel in a few hours, and therefore he wanted by all means to see me at least and to greet me before he left the country, because he would be away while I was in Nairobi. But also a pleasant memory that I can share with you is that Bonaya and I were lucky to meet in 3 summits of the Organization of African Unity at the time. And the first one was in Algeria. And I was Assistant Director General of UNIDO, and he was the foreign minister. So we saw each other briefly at the opening ceremony. And then in the evening, he said that we should see each other. We will organize something. And in the evening, I was at the hotel, and I was told that a Kenyan ambassador was waiting for me downstairs. And I was a bit surprised, and I went downstairs. And the Kenyan ambassador to Cairo was downstairs, and he told me, the minister asked me to bring you over for dinner. So I had to go and with the ambassador to have dinner with him. But the funny thing was that at that summit, Somalia was not at all represented because there was no government in Somalia. And Bonaya was also involved in mediation efforts and in efforts by Kenya and other governments to try to help the Somalis to resolve their problems. And he told me jokingly, today I was with the foreign minister of Gambia, and before I told him that you were here, he saw that the Somali seat was empty, and I told him that you were here, and he said, and why don't we ask him to at least fill the seat and sit there so that Somalia's seat is not vacant? And I told him, no, I am an international civil servant. I can't do that. So we're joking about that. So it was such a pleasure, really, to meet him at those summit conferences and to talk also about the efforts that he was involved in as far as the civil war in Somalia was concerned. So with these personal reminiscences, I think that I can tell you that Bonaya Godana was not only a scholar, he was not only a diplomat, he was not only a politician, he was a statesman whose life and legacy should be celebrated in Kenya and in Africa as a whole. Because we Africans, we only know how to celebrate the life of chiefs or of presidents or of the big guys who are the political leaders of the country as presidents, etc. But we always neglect something that you see everywhere in Europe, and that is our to celebrate the life and legacy of our scholars, of our great diplomats, of our great jurists, of our great statesmen who, although they never became heads of state, because a statesman doesn't have to become a head of state. And I live here in The Hague next to the Supreme Court of the Netherlands. And I pass in front of it every day. And there are outside the building, there are the busts of three of the most famous jurists that the Netherlands had in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. And I think that we should think about having that kind of monument for Bonaya Godana, either at the university or at the Foreign Ministry of Kenya. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Judge Yusuf. As you put it, the personal reminiscence of your time with Dr. Godana is really telling, because it is in your shoulders that us, the incoming international law students, scholars, that we sit on. And as I say that, we segue to someone who was directly influenced into international law by Dr. Godana, who is Professor Phoebe Okowa. Professor Okowa is a professor of public international law at Queen's Mary University of London. She was the first African woman elected to the United Nations International Law Commission in 2023. She has also been a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Please welcome Professor Okowa. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Humphrey, and thank you very much to my co-panelists. For this occasion, Humphrey and I have talked about for quite some time, partly because of who Dr. Bonaya was, and partly because I thought, as Judge Yusuf said, it was time that we properly celebrated our scholars and our statesmen. I'm particularly grateful today, listening to Honorable Sara Bonaya, for giving us insights into Dr. Godana's early life, which we didn't know about, and much of his subsequent work as a parliamentarian. This, for me, is particularly useful because the last class that Dr. Godana taught public international law in 1987, before he entered Parliament, much of his subsequent life and much of his early life was not very well known to most of us. So I hope this is just the beginning of a program or a series of programs in which we'll properly restore dignity to Dr. Godana's work. I first met Dr. Godana at my most impressionable. I was a 19-year-old who had gone to study law at the University of Nairobi. Dr. Godana was the staff of legends. He was tall, he was handsome, he was a very prominent figure on campus, and he walked very fast. We knew very little about him, but we were very intrigued about him. A few things that we knew, Mama Sara has already talked about, that he was the first person to get a first-class honors degree in the University of Nairobi, that he had most recently published a monograph, which was published by the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva. And so we were intrigued and very curious as to when we would get to start his classes, which was a third-year class in public international law. In my second year, as I was reading in the library, I stumbled across Dr. Godana's undergraduate dissertation. And his undergraduate dissertation was looking at property rights in Kenya and whether or not colonial terms of eminent domain and police powers had any relevance in evaluating property rights in Kenya. He came up with a central argument in his thesis was that property rights, expropriation of property rights within the Kenyan context should be looked at through the lens of the Constitution as a constitutional power of compulsory purchase. This was very different to what everyone else had been teaching us in land law, which was seeing property law pretty much through the lens of private law rights. But his was an attempt to bring a nexus between property rights and public power, and that the question of expropriation should not be looked at through the lens of colonial legacy laws of crown rights, but through constitutional powers within that. I was very intrigued. It may not seem very profound now, but when I tested this in my own land law class, everyone was very impressed. And I'm not entirely sure that I disclosed I'd been reading Dr. Godana's undergraduate dissertation, but there you go. Now, in my third year, of course, I did public international law. This was the time of a one-party state. And I have to say, most of us had very limited access to books. We used Ian Brownlee's book on public international law, but almost everything else we learned about public international law came from what Dr. Godana's own notes. And his was a very concerted attempt to let us have a very critical perspective or critical interrogation of public international law. Much of it drawing on his book on Africa's shared water resources and some of the theoretical arguments that he had advanced in that book, that the priority, for instance, accorded to navigation in the context of water rights reflected a very European preoccupation with navigation, and that there was no necessary reason why navigation should be given priority. His was an attempt to help us understand that international law in its origins was Eurocentric, and that much of the thinking within international law, both the law of succession and even in the context of water treaties, had reflected European priorities and not those of Africa. So I recall him telling us expressly that, pastoralism was particularly important, use of water to pastoralists for purposes of agriculture, domestic uses, and that in the context of an African continent, these were as important as navigational uses, and that the fact that treaties had focused on that was essentially because of European priorities. I think he thematically tried to interrogate those European origins also in the teaching of succession. And I'm not sure how much of this we all took on, but I always say as a parent, you tell your children things and in the hope that maybe one day they'll be very grateful that you gave them a critical education or that you raised these things with them. And it's only with hindsight later, when I went to Oxford, that I realized that my own teaching and my own understanding of international law was a lot more critical. This was even before the advent of twelve thinking as a scholarly attempt to interrogate international law, colonial origins and its neo-colonial perspectives. So for me, Godana had a very profound influence in both my understanding of international law, my decision to become an international lawyer. He was very encouraging because, frankly, he was the only international lawyer I ever met. Throughout my time at the University of Nairobi and almost subsequently. And I remember being told that competition in this field is going to be very stiff with anyone can be an international lawyer. You'll find it very hard to make a name, to make a success of it. But he was most encouraging. And I remember him encouraging me in particular to go to Oxford to do the BCL, because what I didn't know is before Geneva, he had done a master's at the London School of Economics, where he had also been a student of Ian Brownlee. Now, in preparing for this brief talk, reminiscing about Dr. Godana and our time as undergraduates, I reached out on WhatsApp to my classmates to ask them what did they remember about Godana, what was most profound about him. And almost all of them said that they all remember him about his sense of civic responsibility. That on his office on the Gandhi wing on the third floor, almost every day, they were his clansmen who had come to seek advice. If you think about it, we all remember these long queues who'd come far and wide. I have absolutely no idea what advice he was giving them as a 32-year-old academic, but it is very true that anyone would remember, whether you went to consulting, to borrow a book, to discuss a matter of public international law, you'd always pass a group of clansmen from the northeast of Kenya. What was also intriguing, which we discovered through his undergraduate dissertation, and I think Honorable Sara Bonaya has just talked about that, was that he himself was a Catholic. We found this also in his undergraduate dissertation, which even made him more of an enigma, because we had assumed he was from northeastern Kenya, he was probably a Muslim, but we found out that his father was Mzee Daniel Godana, and he had been educated by Catholics. So this even made him more of an enigma, because to our students, he said very little. But almost all of them, and most of my classmates, stayed in Kenya. Of course, I've worked in Kenya. They are presidents of the Court of Appeal. They are judges of the Supreme Court. All of them speak that from Godana, they learned what it means to have a sense of civic responsibility and the fact that of his commitment to his community. Almost all of them have talked about his empathy. One of them wrote that Godana had supervised his undergraduate dissertation, and at a particularly difficult personal time for him because his mother was ill, and he sought countless extensions beyond the permitted deadline. This was at a time when empathy and sympathy was in very short supply at the University of Nairobi. Deadlines were deadlines, but he said he was amazed by his empathy and his sympathy. The other thing that they all talk about was his utter lack of pomposity. He may have been one of the most educated Kenyan international lawyers, first-class honors degree, had gone to University of Geneva, but came back very much ready to serve his people. And in his interactions with students, they all talked about his fairness, his kindness, and that these qualities were in full display once he went to Parliament and once he became foreign minister. Those who interacted with him said it was very hard to know that he had transitioned from being a university lecturer to being the foreign minister of the Republic of Kenya. They also talked about his kindness and that he was always, in his interactions in the context of parliamentary duties, he was always a unifying figure. So in a sense, I think we celebrate someone that we ought to celebrate more. And all I can say is I hope this is the beginning of many more events, perhaps a public event in person, when we can reflect in greater depth about the resources which, as you had today, Professor Boisson de Chazournes talked about in great detail, and really talk about what his legacy means for us as Kenyan international lawyers and for the future of our discipline. But that's all I want to say. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and to the Bonaya family too for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I see Honorable Bonaya's hand is raised. Could you kindly take over the floor? And right after her, we'll listen to the daughter of Dr. Bonaya Godana, Angela Gumato, and then we'll go into the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make a correction there. His father was not a Catholic. He was just a pastoralist, and Daniel Godana is a different one. You know, the name Godana is very common. Is anybody born when people are migrating, and we're always migrating? Daniel Godana was an assistant minister post-independent. Bonaya's dad, Adi Godana, was just a nomadic who passed away in 1997. No, sorry, in 1996, I think, when he was in London school. Yeah, he was a pure pastoralist. We both joined Catholic Church on our own volition. Yes.
I see. Thank you.
Yes,
But there's a tribute.
Okay. Yes, a correction. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Prof. Okowa, you think?
I was just saying that there was a tribute to Daniel Godana in the book. And obviously, these are the recollections of a 20-year-old, almost 40 years later, I'm sure. I didn't have a chance to go and look at the dissertation again, but I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll listen first to Angela, and then we'll segue to the question and answer session. And if you have any questions for our attendees, so I should say we are just under 100 people. So thank you so much for all joining us. If you have any questions, send them in the Q&A. Thank you. Angela, please.
Thank you very much, Elvis. Yes, my name is Angela Bonaya. I am the last born to the late Dr. Bonaya Godana. I have 3 of my siblings. I think they're also online. That is, our eldest is Sophia Bonaya, followed by my brother Daniel Bonaya, and followed by my second brother, Michael Bonaya. So first and foremost, I would like to sincerely appreciate the Kabarak University for this great initiative in honoring the legacy of my late father. It's been very inspiring hearing from his former classmates, his colleagues, his students, who have all achieved a lot in the international law space. It's truly an honor. And for me, for my experience, of course, I didn't get to know him for many years. At that time, he passed away in 2006. I was only 10 years old. So most of my recollection of him and learning about him has been through engagement with his peers in the legal space. And it's truly remarkable hearing and learning about him through life, knowing his contribution, especially at that time in international law, where there was not much studies done by Africans that's relevant to the global south. So that in itself was truly inspiring. And actually, I just noticed I ended up doing my undergraduate dissertation similar to him. And it had not clicked in my head until Professor Phoebe actually mentioned it, because I also wrote now on compulsory acquisition and in Kenya, and I looked at just and fair compensation, while at the same time looking at how that affects community land rights. So that in itself, I was really happy to hear that. And yes, for masters, I was also inspired actually to do my degree in law. I'm also a lawyer. And I was also taught by one of the panelists here, Mr. Humphrey Sipala, that's in Strathmore University. So it's truly an honor. I think with time, I got to really get a sense of my father's work. And through that, I was also inspired to do my master's in international law, which I did at the University of Bristol. And even there, I focused more on international human rights law, and particularly with regards to the implementation of indigenous people's rights at domestic level. Today, I work now as a legislative and procedural advisor in Parliament. And through that, again, interacting with his former colleagues, it's really been remarkable knowing he did the standing orders that still apply today. So we, as a family, we're also planning to publish a book in his honor. So meeting the various panelists today, I think we will definitely be getting in touch with them just for a session and to just get a glimpse of the interactions they had, and which will also help us in our quest to publish the book. So most of the values, of course, that I've learned from my father is his hard work, his dedication, his helpfulness and service to the community. I will attest that growing up, we've never had our house empty. You know, it's always full. We have maybe even 20, 30 people. These are people he educates, people who are sick, people, everyone. It was just, you know, open door policy. Anyone can come to Bonaya's house, regardless of tribe, regardless of religion, regardless of background. So that in itself is a challenge also to every one of us in how we interact with people, even regardless of our status. And yes, so basically, I think we've covered most of it, getting insights from my mother. And I think she had not mentioned actually one of the key activities, or rather incidents that happened was when there was the US bomb blast. Actually, she was giving me a story when there was the US bomb blast in Kenya, and my father was the foreign affairs minister. At the time, she was a nurse working in Kenyatta Hospital, so in the casualty unit. So having these two scenarios, on one side, your husband has to come back, give a press conference on the state of affairs. On the other side, there's the wife in casualty treating the victims who suffered. So yes, I think this is such a great initiative, and I'm sure we will be doing more of this. And I wanted to thank the panelists for this special event in his honor. And we, as a family, will also commit to collaborate with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. That was really beautiful. So I'd remind us again, you can send your questions to the chat through the Q&A section. So I have a question, and this is really my positionality. I'm a finalist student at Kabarak University, and a career in international law is something I really look forward to. But around me is this certain kind of rhetoric saying that because international law is not, it's failing us, looking at the things around happening in Iran, in Palestine. There's this such a strand of thinking where it's always on law Twitter everywhere, where having international law isn't working. So why would you even start a career in that? So my question to the panel here is how to question this rhetoric, which I think is really wrong. And I think that this rhetoric leads to us not having enough or very few African people around the international law space. Thank you so much. Professor Okowa or Judge Yusuf. Thank you.
Judge Yusuf, do you want to have a go first, or shall I have a go first?
Go ahead.
So international law is in crisis. In a sense, it's a crisis of multilateralism. And that's also as much of a crisis affecting political institutions, a crisis in the Security Council, in decision-making processes at the UN, in the General Assembly, but also the fact that for much of the period since states have generally observed rules of international law is a very deliberate disregard of this, and also the failure of political processes that were supposed to hold states in check. So it's not so much a failure of international law in itself, it's also a failure of the multilateral processes which international law is anchored on. Having said that, it is true that there are very many areas where states have disregarded norms of international law, fundamental norms relating to humanitarian law, human rights, norms relating to use of force. But much of international law is observed every day by government officials, government lawyers, diplomatic communities anchored on the basis of international law. No matter what the relations are between states, by and large, they respect the immunities owed to diplomats, much of treaty relations, air travel. So this is not to diminish the very serious cases of violations of international law and their consequences and the almost complete impunity that we observe now in relation to those violations. So my advice to any young person aspiring to be an international lawyer, first, I think to be a good international lawyer, you need to be a good lawyer. The skills you need are the very basic skills of a lawyer. And you need that anyway as a fallback, even if you're going to do international law some of the time. The second one is to say, stay calm and carry on, because yes, there is a crisis, but I think this too will pass, because in the end, all states will realize that it is in their interest to respect and to support the foundational rules on which our shared security is based. That does not answer the question about what we do about the immediate crises we face, but many of those are political crises. Within the institutional architecture in which international law was supposed to operate, the idea was that states, institutions would observe international law every day anyway, and that there would be political repercussions and ways of dealing with that failure. Accountability through law or through courts was intended as a last resort. But we are now in a situation where, by and large, those political processes and institutions for ensuring observance are not working, and the courts are becoming a place of both first and last resort without any clear structures of enforcement. But I think Judge Yusuf may have more to say now that he's about to, after a fairly extensive experience on dealing with these questions. I'm sure you've seen more crises than now.
I agree with what you have said, Phoebe. But, law is not perfect. So you see every day, I'm quite sure in Kenya, as far as domestic law is concerned, that the domestic law is being violated, it's being breached, whether it's being breached by individuals who kill each other, who shoot each other, although this is, of course, a criminal act, which is not tolerated by society nor by the domestic law. You see government officials or policemen breaching the law, violating the law, And so it's not only international law that now and then has to suffer from the violations of the members of the international society. It is also domestic law. So one should not, because one listens every day to the radio and or to the television and sees that there are violations here and there, one should not simply generalize it and say, oh, international law is in crisis. No, international law is not in crisis at all, you know. And if you were here at the International Court of Justice, you would perhaps have said that international law is booming, is prospering. Because when I first came here, we had less than 10 cases pending before the court. And therefore, which meant that there were only 20 states that had disputes that decided to resort to the peaceful settlement, judicial peaceful settlement of disputes. But now the court has more than 24 cases pending before us. And that means about 48 states. So 48 states, let's say. And then there are more than 50 states that are intervening in those disputes, actually, to take part in the hearings of the International Court of Justice and to contribute to it. So you see more trust in the application of international law, because even going back to the 70s, when I was a student of international law, I remember that I came to the Hague Academy, and we met the president of the International Court of Justice, and we asked, but nobody spoke at that time of international law in crisis. But actually, nobody. There were no disputes. Were willing to bring it to the International Court of Justice. So I think that the situation actually is better than worse, than it's better than what it, and that there is more reliance of on international law at the international level today. And as Professor Okowa said, we can't travel. We cannot go anywhere in the world. We cannot fly over the territories of other countries without international law. We cannot call each other. We would not be able to engage and have this conversation through video conference without international law. So, you know, it's not only the law governing the prohibition of war, the law governing armed conflict, the law governing human rights and humanitarian law. That's not only international law. International law has a lot, covers a lot of things. And therefore, each time that there is a violation of the prohibition of war, we should not cry wolf and say international law is collapsing and is falling apart. It is like, you know, when a few people are massacred or killed in a country, if we say the domestic order is collapsing and domestic law is in crisis. We don't say that, do we? So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Okowa and Judge Yusuf. And it reminds me of a statement by Judge Taslim Olawale Elias in an essay that I wrote back when I was in my first year in honor of Judge Taslim Olawale Elias. So he says that even though it would seem that these member states are not following the decisions of the ICJ later on, and he was making reference, I think, to US Tehran, that case, later on they actually come up and follow those decisions. Yeah, thank you so much. And The last thing I wanted to mention is that this idea of honoring our elders is something that one of the journals that is published in the Kabarak University Press, which is a student-run journal, the Kabarak Law Review has done. Whereas I've mentioned, we've already written an essay on Judge Taslim Olawale alias. There's one essay on Professor FX Njenga, who's also a Kenyan international lawyer. And it's a tradition that we hope to continue on. So I'll perhaps invite the panelists for final remarks, and then we can close the webinar. So we could start with Prof. Okowa and then Judge Yusuf. Thank you.
Thanks, Elvis. Mine is just to say that I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity because I was not in Kenya in 2006 at the time when Dr. Bonaya Godana died. And really, I'm just glad that even though it's come through by way of a Zoom call, technology makes it possible for us to do things. And we should just carry on with this conversation and the pleas just to have a much more meaningful, profound gathering in person. There are many, many people that Dr. Godana taught who've gone on to do great things at home. As I mentioned, when I reached out to my classmates, some are presidents of the Supreme Court. They all have different reflections, and some worked with him much more closely. I think he influenced a whole generation of lawyers. And for me, I'm just very profoundly grateful that my career as an international lawyer took off. And so every day I'm grateful for those early days in 1987 and for Dr. Godana pointing me in the right direction, that if I wanted to be an international lawyer, if I was interested in accountability for public power, no one should stop me. I should make it happen. So those words of encouragement were very, very convincing because he was speaking from the platform of authenticity. You heard what Honorable Sara Bonaya said about his own humble upbringings. Those are the upbringings of many of us who are at the University of Nairobi. So in a sense, if he could be an international lawyer, I somehow believed him. And that's why, for me, it's always important to take the platform to speak to gatherings of students at the African regional courses, because I think we also have that responsibility to inspire the next generation and to do so from a platform of authenticity. So I will continue to work with you, to work with Kabarak, and we keep the dialogue and we keep our spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Prof. Judge Yusuf.
Thank you. I just want to say that I hope that you will continue celebrating the life of Dr. Bonaya Godana and to honor his legacy. I think it is something that in which all Kenyan lawyers, all Kenyan international lawyers, and all Kenyan politicians should also be involved, because his loss was a great loss for Kenya and for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. We'll go back to Honorable Sara Bonaya. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think this has been a very exciting and very fruitful engagement. For all those who are following us online, I think especially the students in the field of law and international law, I think you are encouraged. There is nothing, if you have the passion and determination, nothing will stop you. Knowing that Bonaya started from, we can't even explain actually where he started, because it's a miracle that he did all the much that he managed to do. And most of us actually have a similar background. Very few come from privileged positions. Please take heart and push on. You can be whatever you want to be. And I would want to appreciate everybody who turned up and came online to be able part of this process. So let's work together, because there's so much to be done. It's too much for the family. And initially I focused on educating the children. And luckily you have seen Angela, the last born, took up the passion, and She's taken that international law line. All the others have gone to school. They have done very well. I'm proud of all of them. And plus the many, actually, I took up the mantle. He had so many young people he was educating, and I took it up. I never sent anybody's child away, despite all the challenges that a widow faces. And they have all gone to take, they are all responsible citizens of this country. And I didn't want to release anybody, knowing that I also needed a helping hand to reach where I've reached, because I wouldn't have reached where I've reached. So wherever we are, we need to give a helping hand and also know that there is no limit to what you can achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Bonaya. So two last things. So first of all, I want to say that the Kabarak University Press is committed to continue this legacy, this tradition of honoring Dr. Bonaya, and we are starting a blog on international law that will be named after Bonaya Godana. This will be in early September. So if you have any reflections from today or generally any thoughts on international law, we'll be publishing through that Bonaya Godana blog. And the last thing is, please watch out for the next webinar under the International Law Month at Kabarak, which will be focusing on reflecting on 25 years of the African Union Constitutive Act, which is actually the theme of one of our journals, Kabarak Law Review this year. So thank you so much for joining us. I will close with a prayer. Loving Creator of the universe, as we draw this gathering to a close, we thank you for the wisdom shared and the heights united in purpose. We bring this celebration of Dr. Bonaya Godana's legacy to a close. We thank you for the knowledge shared and the unity of the purpose kindled among us today. Grant us humility to listen, courage to act, and grace to lead with compassion. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. And
Goodbye, and thank you so much. It's been an honor.